One of the benefits of being a wine merchant, both wholesale and retail, is that we often get bottles of wine sent to us to sample, to maybe represent in the trade or to put it on the website. And so this morning, I'm going to do something that I do most days, and that's I'm going to taste a couple of wines that have come in for us to try. Now, tasting wine is probably not as much fun as it might sound. It actually takes quite a bit of focus and attention. Today's Sunday. I've just had breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, a little fresh baguette, some spicy tomato chutney. Now this is important because it's good to have something coating the mouth that will help you taste the wine. And the other important thing is I haven't brushed my teeth. So I've still got a little bit of plaque, which means that my teeth are protected from the acid. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to taste a couple of wines. These wines are made by Jo Irvine, and she makes these wines for a company called Dreamstone. The first one we're going to taste is going to be their Sauvignon Blanc from the Adelaide Hills. This is a new vintage release. And the second wine we're going to taste is a brand new wine for them. It's a Roussane. Now, we don't see an enormous amount of Australian Roussane in the country. Roussane originally comes from the Rhone Valley. It's one of the 14 varietals of Southern Rhone that you might find in something like Châteauneuf du Pape. It's often blended with Marsanne and Viognier in white wine blends from the Rhone Valley, and sometimes made as a straight Roussane. This is a straight Roussane. We'll taste that second. So what am I tasting for? Well, I'm tasting for a couple of things. One, I want to see whether I like the wine, but more importantly, I want to see whether the wine has what they call typicity. Now, this is about setting expectations and making sure that when somebody buys this wine, that what they get is what they might expect. So why am I tasting this wine? Well, I'm tasting it for a couple of reasons. One, I want to see whether I like it. But more importantly, I'm tasting the wine for typicity. And that means that does the wine taste like you might expect it to taste? Does the wine taste like somebody who might pick it up in a bottle shop or order it off a wine list? Does that wine taste like they might expect it to taste? So there are a couple of markers. Varietal is one of them. Region is another. And the idea that you've had these kinds of wines before, or these combinations before, leads you to have a certain level of expectation. And so the first one is an Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc. Now, Sauvignon Blanc is incredibly popular as a wine. The Adelaide Hills style of Sauvignon Blanc is different to what we might normally expect out of New Zealand, out of the Marlborough region. Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs, and I'm generalizing here, are often quite tropical, quite fruit-driven, high acid, and quite moorish in that respect, and they're intensely popular as a result. Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc tend to be a little more herbaceous, a little more savoury in structure, a little less tropical, and a little more structured, and possibly a little drier as well. So opening a bottle of Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc, this is exactly what I'm looking for. The vintage, it says on the bottle, is 2022. So it's been crushed this year, harvested this year, crushed this year, fermented this year, rested this year, bottled and released this year, all within about 6 months. It's October. This probably would have been harvested in February or March, earlier and earlier due to climate change, so more likely to be February. And I expect that to be represented by the colour. So the colour is going to be pale, and it's not going to show any secondary characteristics. It's just going to be pretty much primary Sauvignon Blanc fruit. All right, so we check the colour. It's a really pale straw colour. Sometimes Sauvignon Blanc can almost look like water. It can be that pale, but this has got quite a little bit more colour. Might indicate some extra time spent on skins, maybe an extra half hour, extra 45 minutes spent on skins, just to leach a little bit more colour out and a little bit more texture perhaps. On the nose, quite fruit driven. The herbaceousness is mild. It's quite subtle under that fruit, but the fruit is not overpowering. It's not sweet yellow fruit. It's a little more like green fruit. So it's a little bit of kiwi fruit, Chinese gooseberry. There's also something a little bit riper, maybe some guava in there, which is quite an attractive aroma, and quite a bit of ripeness as well. So it's not all green, unripe fruit. There's a bit of lusciousness, there's a bit of richness on the nose. But not overpowering. So they're still quite subtle, quite restrained, which I like in a Sauvignon Blanc. I find the Marlborough styles to be, for me, just a little bit overwhelming, a little bit too much. This is quite restrained, but still quite present. Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc, one of the main markers is its acidity. The acidity here is pronounced, but not overpowering. It's still quite there. There is definitely a dryness to the wine on the back palate. Those same fruit characteristics on the nose have followed through on the palate. This is a nice continuity. There is definitely not as much grassiness, cut grass, herbaceousness, stalkiness as you might get in an Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc. It definitely is veering towards much more fruit drive. Flavor is good. Palate is medium to long. These are not expensive wines. These are probably at the very, very, what we would call the value end of the price spectrum. In a bottle shop, you might be looking to pay about $20 for something like this. It's very good. There's a little bit of yellow delicious apple flavors coming through. Yellow Delicious as opposed to Granny Smith. Yellow Delicious is a bit more of a rounder, richer flavor in an apple. You really don't see them much anymore. I guess I grew up with Yellow Delicious apples, Yellow Delicious, Red Delicious. The apples you find in fruit stores these days are a lot more exotic. The Fujis and Kansis and Galas and Pink Ladies. When I was growing up, none of those apples were there, but we had Yellow Delicious and Red Delicious. This is definitely much a Yellow Delicious kind of. Yellow Delicious is almost pear-like, almost Nashi pear-like, but still definitely apple. Good length. I think for the price, this is a really well-considered wine that delivers more than what you would expect for the price point. I wouldn't be disappointed with this at all. And it's not overpowering for Sauvignon Blanc, which means it's actually going to do well with food. There you go. That's the Dreamstone Sauvignon Blanc 2022. The wines are chilled, although they haven't come straight out of the fridge. I don't want them too cold. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to put this aside for the time being, and I'm going to come back to it when it's a lot closer to room temperature, and I'm going to taste it again. At that point, a lot more flavors may become apparent, and you can just sort of further your adjudication of the wine in that regard. I understand most people will drink it chilled, but it's good to know what the base wine tastes like when it isn't cold. Cold refrigeration tends to dumb down a lot of flavors and aromas. So with white wines and rosés, it sometimes pays to taste them at room temperature. All right, so the next one is going to be that Roussane. As I said before, Roussane is originally a Rhone varietal from France. Now, I could think back to what I might expect from a Roussane from the Southern Rhone, but realistically speaking, Roussane made in Australia is going to be different. We really aren't looking to replicate the Rhone. We're looking to see how Roussane behaves in our country and in particular in some regions. So this fruit was grown on the southern Fluria Peninsula. So the southern Fluria is in South Australia. It's the region essentially south of McLaren Vale, and it's a peninsula that juts out into the ocean, and so there are vineyards all the way from McLaren Vale down south. Everything south of McLaren Vale can be sometimes referred to as Southern Flurio, Aldinga. There are a couple of other sort of names, but this is probably where it comes from. Roussane, let's have a look. First things first, color. So you can see it's a much darker color than the Sauvignon Blanc. It has some golden highlights in it and a bit of medium green. Yeah, it's what I'd expect from the grape. Roussanne grapes tend to have a slightly thicker skin and provide a bit more texture. So this is a good indication that it's true to type. Now on the nose, it's not overly generous. It does have some yellow stone fruits on there, as well as some melon aromas, rock melon, cantaloupe, if you're watching this from Melbourne. And a little bit of herbaceousness, a little bit of grass, a little bit of leafiness. Maybe some passion fruit. There's definitely a ripeness to it. There's a richness. It's almost like a pawpaw. It's quite full, and also some other savoury characteristics. A dustiness, almost like a graphite quality. Now, graphite's not something you normally find in white wine. It's something you might find in Cabernets, in cool climate Cabernets. It's the smell of pencil shaving sometimes. There's a little bit of that under there. It'd be interesting to speak to the winemaker to see if there were any whole bunch in there, any stalks thrown in there to give it that little bit of extra herbaceousness. But here's the true test. A much bigger wine than Sauvignon Blanc. Really quite full, really quite rich. Again, that savoury, almost graphite element is there across the mid and back palates. Not very fruit driven. This is a textured, savoury white wine. This is a food wine. This is a wine that will give you freshness in the mouth. It'll give you dryness in the mouth. The acidity is quite subdued, especially after drinking Sauvignon Blanc. But it has a lovely feel. It has a fullness and a richness. It has a generosity of palate that's really very attractive. Again, medium length palate, nice and fresh, nice and full, good savoury notes, a little bit of pith, a little bit of grit from the skins, a little bit of texture. That's not slick or oily. It's quite earthy in that regard. No, I like this wine a lot. It's interesting. I mean, making Roussanne in Australia is not something that you would do for huge commercial success. There would be a handful of Roussanne producers. Most people would probably use it in blends. Sometimes it gets blended in with Syrah in the same way as Viognier does. And most likely it's going to be part of a trio of wines, Roussanne, Marsanne, Viognier. So standing on its own, you need to be able to be confident that the wine is going to deliver enough by itself to make it worth drinking. And I think this wine does that. There is a there is a presence to the wine that's really very satisfying. 2022 Roussane from the Floria Peninsula. It's relatively high in alcohol as well, 13.5%, but no sweetness, bone dry. A good wine. Okay. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.